Hello everyone, and welcome back. Tonight I bring you a full-length fan fiction inspired by Howl's moving castle. In this tale, we join Sophie Hatter and the ever-dramatic Wizard Howl as they face an unusual crisis. Someone has stolen Christmas itself, from market chipping to the royal palace, and even into the frozen reaches of Ingary. This is a magical winter adventure filled with warmth, wit, and a touch of chaos. So settle in somewhere cozy, dim the lights, and let's drift together into a story where love, laughter, and just a bit of mischief might be enough to bring Christmas back. Chapter 1, in which Sophie discovers Christmas has gone missing. Sophie Hatter woke on the morning of December 1st to find that something was terribly wrong with market chipping. She couldn't put her finger on it at first, which annoyed her considerably. Sophie prided herself on being sensible, and sensible people notice things straight away. She dressed in her second-best gray dress, the one without the scorch marks from last Tuesday's incident with Calcifer and the flying frying pan, and went downstairs to the castle's main room. Howl was already there, which was suspicious in itself. He stood by the window in a magnificent scarlet suit with gold buttons, peering out at market chipping through a jeweled telescope he'd probably bought on impulse. "Something's off," he announced without turning around. "I know," Sophie said, trying not to sound pleased that she'd noticed too. "Where's Michael?" "Sent him to check the other doors." "Calcifer, you haven't been eating spells again, have you?" The fire demon crackled indignantly on his logs. "When have I ever—" "Don't answer that. But no, this isn't me. Though I did notice the bacon tasted particularly unfestive this morning." Sophie frowned. Unfestive? That's when it struck her. December 1st. No wreaths on doors, no ribbons in shop windows, no children making paper chains or writing lists. The absence of Christmas preparation was so complete, it felt like a hole in the world. "Christmas," she said. "It's gone." Howl lowered his telescope and turned to face her, his green eyes unusually serious. "Not just gone. Stolen. I can feel the edges where it was torn away." He ran a hand through his currently auburn hair, which immediately arranged itself into perfect waves. "Someone's taken Christmas from Ingary." "Who would steal Christmas?" Sophie demanded, already reaching for her shawl. "And more importantly, why?" Michael burst through the Porthaven door, red-faced and panting. "Master Howl! The fishermen don't remember Christmas. They looked at me like I was mad when I asked about puddings and carols." Calcifer's flames turned an interesting shade of purple. "Oh, this is bad. This is very bad. Without Christmas, there won't be any Yule log, and I was so looking forward to the extra holiday magic. It makes me burn prettier colors." "Never mind your colors," Sophie said briskly, though she privately agreed that Christmas made everything more magical, even temperamental fire demons. "We need to find out who's responsible." Howl was already moving toward his workbench, gathering mysterious bottles and packets. It would take considerable power to steal an entire holiday. We're dealing with someone, or something, extraordinarily dangerous. He paused dramatically, one hand on his chest. "My heart feels quite weak at the thought." Sophie ignored this piece of theater. After 3 years of marriage, she'd learned when Howl was genuinely worried versus when he was simply being Howl. The fact that he was actually preparing useful spells instead of rushing off to change his outfit suggested genuine concern. Could it be the witch? Michael asked nervously. She's reformed, Sophie reminded him. Mostly. Besides, she loves Christmas. She told me last week she was planning to knit everyone's scarves. Heaven help us, Howl muttered, measuring something sparkly into a vial. Her last scarf tried to strangle the mayor. A knock at the door interrupted them. Not the castle door, one of the magical doors. The Kingsbury entrance, from the sound of it. Sophie opened it to find a royal messenger, looking deeply confused. Begging your pardon, the man said, but His Majesty requests Wizard Howl's immediate attendance. Something strange is happening at court. The princess insists we should be preparing for some sort of winter celebration, but nobody can remember what she means. Howl swept his scarlet cloak around his shoulders with unnecessary drama. Tell His Majesty we'll be there within the hour. Sophie, you'd better come. Michael, stay here with Calcifer and see if you can find anything about holiday stealing spells in my books. The ones that bite or the ones that sing? Michael asked. He'd been tinkering for weeks with a portable hearth charm the witch had mentioned, muttering about giving Calcifer legs one day. Sophie had dismissed it as another half-finished experiment, until now. Start with the ones that grumble. They're usually more informative. As Sophie gathered her things, she noticed Howl staring at the empty spot on the mantel, where, in any proper December, there should have been holly and candles. His expression was thoughtful, and, unless she was mistaken, genuinely sad. We'll get it back, she said quietly. He turned to her with one of his mercurial smiles. Of course we will. I look absolutely stunning in Christmas colors. It would be a crime to deprive the world of that. But as they prepared to leave for Kingsbury, Sophie noticed him tucking several powerful protective charms into his pockets. Whatever had stolen Christmas from Ingary, Howl was taking it very seriously indeed. The castle lurched into motion, and through the window, Sophie watched market chipping slide past, a town that should have been bright with preparation and anticipation, now simply gray and ordinary in the winter morning. Someone had indeed stolen Christmas, and Sophie Hatter was going to get it back, even if she had to chase it to the ends of all the worlds to do it. Chapter 2, in which the palace is decidedly unfestive. The palace at Kingsbury was wrong in ways that made Sophie's teeth ache. Where there should have been garlands draping the great staircase, there was nothing. Where crowds of servants should have been rushing about with puddings and packages, they walked empty-handed, looking vaguely puzzled. Most disturbing of all, the throne room's massive fireplace, which Sophie distinctly remembered from last Christmas, blazing with a fire that danced in the shapes of reindeer and stars, held only ordinary flames. Wizard Howl, the king rose from his throne, looking relieved. And Mrs. Sophie, thank goodness you've come. Princess Valeria has been going on about missing celebrations all morning, and frankly, we're concerned she may be ill. The princess, a sensible young woman of 16, who took after her mother, stood beside the throne with her arms crossed. I am not ill, father. Something important is missing. I can feel it, like a word on the tip of my tongue. Your Highness remembers? Sophie said, curtsying. That's interesting. Sophie noticed a faint shimmer near the girl's heart, a warmth that pulsed when she spoke, the mark of old royal blood that sometimes carried emotional magic. Perhaps that was why she alone felt the loss. Remembers what? The king looked between them, bewildered. Howl swept forward in a bow so elaborate that his scarlet cloak formed a perfect circle around him. Your Majesty, someone has stolen Christmas. Stolen what? Exactly, Howl said, straightening. The holiday. The entire concept, removed from Ingary as thoroughly as if it never existed. The king's chancellor, a thin man who always looked as if he'd bitten into something sour, sniffed dismissively. Preposterous. You cannot steal something that doesn't exist. But it does exist, Princess Valeria insisted. There should be trees with things on them, and songs about snow and joy and... She pressed her hands to her temples. It hurts to try to remember. Sophie noticed Howl's eyes narrow. He pulled out a small silver mirror from his pocket and held it up to catch the light from the windows. Your Highness, would you look into this for a moment? The princess peered into the mirror. Suddenly, golden threads became visible around her head, like a net made of light pulsing faintly. A remembering spell, Howl said grimly. Someone wanted to make sure at least one person in the palace could sense what was missing. He turned the mirror toward the king and chancellor. No threads appeared. But why the princess specifically? Before anyone could answer, the throne room doors burst open. Prince Justin rushed in, still in his traveling clothes and covered in mud. Your Majesty, I've just returned from the north and... He stopped, looking around in confusion. Where are the decorations? Not you too, the king groaned. Prince Justin was outside Ingary, Sophie realized. He wasn't here when Christmas was stolen. Justin's usually cheerful face was grave. Stolen? But I've just come from Strangia, and they're preparing for their winter celebrations as always. It's only Ingary that seems empty. Which means, Howl said slowly, our thief specifically targeted this kingdom. This is personal. A cold wind suddenly swept through the throne room, despite all the windows being closed. The flames in the fireplace turned an icy blue, and frost spread across the floor in spiraling patterns. Everyone's breath became visible in the suddenly freezing air. Who dares speak of what was taken? The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, sharp as icicles and cold as starless nights. Howl immediately stepped in front of Sophie, which would have been romantic if she hadn't noticed him also stepping in front of a very expensive tapestry. The king's guards drew their swords, though they looked uncertain what to point them at. The frost on the floor formed letters. Christmas belongs to winter. Ingary spurned winter. Now Ingary shall have neither. Spurned winter? Sophie said indignantly. We had 3 blizzards last year. Not winter's cold, the voice howled. Winter's heart. The blue flames suddenly erupted upward, and in them, Sophie glimpsed a figure, tall and thin, made of ice and shadow, wearing a crown of frozen stars. Then the vision shattered, the flames returned to normal, and the frost melted away, leaving only puddles and confusion. Well, Howl said after a moment, examining a singed edge of his cloak with disgust. That was dramatic. Also, this was my best cloak. Did anyone recognize that, whatever it was? The king asked, sinking back onto his throne. Prince Justin frowned thoughtfully. There are old stories about the Winter King from before Ingary was properly settled. but those are just fairy tales. In my experience, Sophie said dryly, fairy tales have an annoying habit of being true. Princess Valeria suddenly gasped. The archive. The Royal Archive has a restricted section about the kingdom's founding. If these Winter King stories are real, there might be records there. Excellent thinking, Your Highness, Howl said, already heading for the door. Sophie, we should... Wizard Howl, the king interrupted. I'm appointing you officially to resolve this matter. Use whatever resources you need. A kingdom without... He frowned, struggling with the concept. Without whatever was taken, it feels wrong. Fix it. As they left the throne room, Sophie noticed Howl was unusually quiet. What are you thinking? That someone who can steal an entire holiday and leave only gaps in memory is far too powerful to be some forgotten fairy tale, he said, and that crown of frozen stars looked familiar, though I can't think why. Prince Justin caught up with them in the corridor. I'm coming with you to the archive. If this involves the old stories, you'll need someone who actually paid attention during history lessons. Unlike some of us who spent history lessons perfecting our hair, Sophie said, eyeing Howl. My hair is a work of art that deserves dedication, Howl replied automatically, but his heart wasn't in the banter. He kept glancing at windows, as if expecting another appearance from their mysterious Winter King. The Royal Archive was in the palace's oldest wing, down stone steps that grew colder with each level they descended. Sophie pulled her shawl tighter, wishing she'd worn her warmest dress. Even Howl seemed affected by the chill, his usual graceful stride becoming brisker. The restricted section is through here, Justin said, producing an ornate key. Fair warning, some of these books are odd. Odd how? Sophie asked. Her question was answered when they opened the door and a book immediately flew at Howl's head, squeaking indignantly. He caught it with ease. A treatise on proper hat etiquette. How vicious. The restricted archive was a circular room lined floor to ceiling with ancient volumes. Some glowed faintly, others seemed to absorb light, and one shelf appeared to be gently snowing despite being indoors. The founding records are here, Justin said, pulling out a massive leather-bound volume that was chained to the shelf. This mentions the Winter Court. Sophie and Howl crowded around as Justin opened the book. The pages were so old they seemed ready to crumble, covered in spidery handwriting that shifted between languages mid-sentence. Here, Justin pointed. Before the first king of Ingary established the realm, this land was ruled by the seasonal courts. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter each held sway for 3 months, but the Winter King grew greedy, trying to extend his season year-round. Let me guess, Sophie said. The first king defeated him? Not exactly. Justin turned the page carefully. They made a bargain. The Winter King would withdraw to the spaces between, neither in this world nor out of it, and in exchange, mortals would honor winter with a great celebration at year's end, a celebration of warmth in the cold, light in the darkness. Christmas, Howl breathed. The Winter King created Christmas. No, mortals created Christmas to appease him, to show that even in winter's depths, humanity could find joy. It was meant to keep him at bay. Justin looked troubled. But if Christmas has been stolen, then the bargain is broken, Sophie finished, and the Winter King is free to return. A laugh like breaking ice echoed through the archive. Books flew off their shelves, and the snowing shelf became a blizzard. In the chaos, Sophie saw words forming in the frost on the walls. Clever little mortals, but not clever enough. Winter comes for Ingary, and this time it comes forever. "Run!" Howl shouted, throwing up a shield of golden light as icicles erupted from the ceiling. They fled the archive, books shrieking and flapping after them like papery bats. Behind them, Sophie could hear the terrible sound of winter claiming the room, wood splintering under ice, stone cracking from cold. They didn't stop running until they reached the main floor, where confused servants stared at their frost-covered clothes and wild expressions. "We need to get back to the castle," Howl said urgently. "If the Winter King is returning, we need more than just the three of us to stop him." "4," Princess Valeria said, appearing at the top of the stairs with a traveling bag. "Father doesn't remember what we're fighting for, but I do. And I'm coming with you." Sophie started to protest, but something in the young princess's expression stopped her. It was the same determination Sophie had felt when she'd first set out to rescue Howl from himself. "Fine," she said, "but you're helping with the research. I have a feeling we're going to need every fairy tale, legend, and scrap of winter lore we can find if we're going to save Christmas." As they hurried from the palace, Sophie noticed the sky had grown dark with clouds that shouldn't exist in early December. They rolled and churned like living things, and she could swear she saw faces in them, cold, cruel faces with crowns of ice. The Winter King wasn't just coming, he was already here. Chapter 3, in which the castle gets crowded. The castle was in chaos when they returned. Michael had every book from Howl's library spread across the floor in complicated patterns. Calcifer was burning 3 different colors at once, and there was a determined banging on the Porthaven door. "Finally!" Michael exclaimed. "Master Howl, the books keep arguing with each other about winter mythology. Calcifer says he's feeling pulled toward something in the north, and your sister's been trying to break down the door for the past hour, Sophie." "Which sister?" Sophie asked, though the aggressive knocking rather answered that question. "Martha. She says Letty sent her, and she won't go away." Sophie opened the door to find Martha, her youngest sister, looking thunderous. She was still in her bakery apron, dusted with flour and what appeared to be blue sparks. "Sophie, finally, do you know what's happened to all my holiday recipes? They've turned into recipes for grey gruel. Every last one." Mrs. Fairfax is beside herself and... Martha stopped, noticing Princess Valeria. "Your Highness?" For reasons no one could quite name, people still found themselves halfway through forgotten traditions, hanging ribbons with no idea why, humming tunes that ended before the last note. The memory of Christmas hadn't vanished entirely, only blurred like ink left in rain. "Please, just call me Valeria. We're all dealing with the same crisis." "Martha, someone's stolen Christmas," Sophie explained quickly. "The Winter King from the old stories. We're trying to get it back." Martha's expression shifted from angry to thoughtful. "That explains the blue sparks. Magic keeps misfiring at the bakery. Letty said the same thing's happening at Mrs. Fairfax's. She's on her way here with... oh no." "With whom?" Howl asked suspiciously. Before Martha could answer, the Kingsbury door opened and in swept the Witch of the Waste. Not the ancient, feeble version Sophie had once cared for, but not the terrifying enemy of old either. She'd settled somewhere in between, a handsome woman of indeterminate middle age with silver-streaked hair and a tendency to cackle at inappropriate moments. "Howl, darling," she exclaimed. "Your delicious nephew Benjamin told me you were investigating the disappearance of that winter holiday. I've come to help." "How do you remember Christmas?" Sophie asked. The witch tapped her nose conspiratorially. "I've been alive long enough to remember when the Winter King walked freely. Dreadful bore, always going on about eternal frost and the beauty of frozen tears. No sense of style at all." "You knew him?" Prince Justin leaned forward eagerly. "Knew him? I dated him briefly, about 200 years ago. Terrible mistake. He gave me ice roses for courtship gifts. Have you ever tried to smell an ice rose? You can't. They have no scent, and they melt all over your best dress." Howl made a strangled noise. "You dated the Winter King?" "Don't look so shocked. I was quite the beauty in my youth. Still am, really." The witch settled into Howl's chair without invitation. "The important thing is, I know his weaknesses." "Which are?" Sophie prompted. "He cannot bear genuine warmth. Not heat, mind you, but emotional warmth. Love, joy, friendship. All those sticky feelings mortals are so good at. That's why Christmas was such a perfect prison for him. All that goodwill and celebration created a barrier he couldn't cross." Calcifer's flames suddenly shot up. "Someone's coming through the waste door. Someone cold." The door marked with a black blob creaked open slowly. In walked a figure Sophie didn't recognize. A young man with white hair and pale blue eyes, wearing clothes that seemed to be made of winter morning mist. Ice crystals formed on the floor where he stepped. Everyone tensed, but the stranger raised his hands peacefully. "I'm not here to fight. My name is Nicholas. I was the spirit of Christmas present." "Was?" Sophie noticed his edges seemed to blur, as if he wasn't entirely solid. "When the Winter King stole Christmas, he shattered us, past, present, and future. We're barely holding on to existence." Nicholas swayed, and Prince Justin quickly offered him a chair. "I've come to warn you. The Winter King isn't working alone." "Of course he isn't," Howl sighed. "Why would anything be simple?" Nicholas continued weakly. "Someone from your world helped him break free. Someone who wanted Christmas gone for their own reasons. They're the one who actually stole it. The Winter King just provided the power." "But who would want to destroy Christmas?" Michael asked. "Someone who hates joy," suggested Martha. "Someone who profits from misery," the witch added. "Or someone who got coal in their stocking one too many times," Calcifer crackled. Princess Valeria had been quiet, studying Nicholas intently. "You're fading," she said softly. "If we don't restore Christmas soon, you'll disappear entirely, won't you?" Nicholas nodded. "All three of us will. And without the spirits of Christmas, the holiday can never truly return. Even if you defeat the Winter King, Christmas will remain just a word, a hollow memory." "Then we need to find where Christmas is being kept," Sophie said firmly. "The Winter King must have hidden it somewhere." "Oh, I know where it is," the witch said casually, examining her nails. Everyone turned to stare at her. "You what?" Howl's voice went up an octave. "The crystal caverns of the north, obviously. It's where he always kept his treasures when we were together. Dreadfully cold and impossible to find unless you know the way." She looked up at their expressions. "What? Did you think I came here just to reminisce about my romantic history?" "Can you take us there?" Sophie asked. I could, but it won't be easy. The caverns exist between worlds, like the Winter King himself. We'll need a way to travel between. The witch's eyes lit up. Oh, your castle. Howl, your castle already moves between places. With a bit of adjustment, it could slide between worlds. Not merely doors to towns, but doors between realities. A little recalibration of those lovely dials of yours, and we'll slip between the folds of creation itself. Howl was already moving toward his workbench. It would take enormous power, Calcifer. The fire demon considered. I could do it, but I'd need help. More magic than just my own. I can contribute, the witch offered. As can I, Nicholas said, though he looked barely capable of standing. And I know someone else who might help, Martha said suddenly. Ben Sullivan, Mrs. Fairfax's grandson. He's been studying weather magic, but Letty says he's stuck in Upper Folding. The roads are all frozen. Letty was coming too, but she's helping Mrs. Fairfax with the magical overflow at the shop, Martha added. She sends her love and says to give the Winter King a piece of her mind if we find him. Sophie looked around the increasingly crowded castle. A reformed witch, a fading Christmas spirit, a princess, a prince, and her sister, all crammed into a space that was already chaotic on a good day. Right, she said in her most practical voice. Michael, clear the books. And weren't you working on that portable hearth spell the witch taught you last month? Michael's eyes lit up. The one that might let Calcifer leave the castle temporarily. It's not tested. Perfect. Work on it while we're planning. We might need Calcifer mobile. Sophie turned to the others. Now, let's focus on what we know. We'll need floor space for whatever spell Howl's creating. Martha, fetch Ben. Your Highness, Valeria, you and Prince Justin start looking through those books for anything about the crystal caverns. Nicholas, sit by Calcifer and rest. You look ready to evaporate. What about me? The witch asked. You're going to tell us everything you remember about the Winter King. Every weakness, every habit, every embarrassing detail from your courtship. The witch grinned wickedly. Oh, this will be fun. Did I mention he was terrified of mice? Something about their warm little hearts beating so fast. As everyone scattered to their tasks, Howl caught Sophie's arm gently. This is dangerous. More dangerous than anything we've faced. The Winter King isn't like other enemies. He's elemental, ancient. If we fail. Eternal winter for Ingary, Sophie finished. I know, but when has danger ever stopped us? He smiled then, the genuine smile she loved rather than his practiced, charming one. Never, though I do wish it didn't always happen right when I'd got my hair perfect. A sudden blast of cold air swept through the castle, and Nicholas cried out in pain. His form flickered like a candle in wind. He's coming, Nicholas gasped. The Winter King knows I'm here. He's sending his hunters. Through the window, Sophie saw them, shapes of ice and shadow-riding winds that howled like wolves, descending on market chipping. People in the streets below didn't seem to see them, still going about their December day, with no idea that Christmas should exist. How long until they reach us? Sophie asked. Minutes, Nicholas managed. Howl's hands were already glowing with defensive spells. Then we'd better work fast. Martha, forget fetching Ben. We need you here. Everyone circle up. We're going to attempt something stupid. Your specialty, Sophie said dryly. We're going to move the castle between worlds right now, before we're ready, before the hunters arrive. Howl looked around at their assembled group. It might not work. We might end up scattered across realities or stuck in the space between forever. Better than letting those things catch us, the witch said cheerfully. I haven't had this much excitement in decades. The howling was getting closer. Frost was forming on the windows, despite Calcifer's heat. Everyone hold hands, Howl commanded. Think about Christmas, whatever fragments you remember. Sophie, you're our anchor. Whatever happens, don't let go. Sophie grabbed Howl's hand with her right and Michael's with her left, feeling the others form a circle around Calcifer's hearth. The fire demon blazed higher, his flames reaching toward the ceiling. Here we go, Calcifer roared. The castle lurched, the walls began to blur, and outside, the hunters' howls turned to shrieks of rage as their prey slipped between their icy fingers, sliding sideways out of the world. Chapter 4, in which traveling between worlds is even worse than coach travel. Sophie had experienced many uncomfortable sensations since marrying Howl, being turned into a cat, flying through thunderstorms, and that memorable incident with the inside-out spell. But sliding between worlds was decidedly the worst. It felt like being pulled through a keyhole, while simultaneously expanding like bread dough. The air smelled of lightning and old books and something sweet sharp, like peppermint left in the sun too long. Her ears popped repeatedly, each time revealing new sounds. Distant orchestras, backwards whispers, the echo of bells that hadn't rung yet. Her eyes showed her things that couldn't possibly exist, colors that had no names, distances that folded in on themselves, and a disturbing number of floating teacups. Is anyone else seeing the teacups? Michael's voice came from somewhere to her left, though left had stopped meaning anything useful. Those are mine, sorry, the witch called out. I collect them from different realities. That spotted one is from a world where everyone is left-handed. The castle groaned around them, its walls stretching and compressing like accordion bellows. Through the windows, Sophie glimpsed impossible landscapes, a desert made of snow, a forest where the trees grew downward, a city built entirely of crystallized music. Calcifer, how are you managing? Howl shouted over the sound of reality rearranging itself. Badly, the fire demon roared. This is like trying to burn in 7 directions at once. Also, I think we're being followed. Sophie tightened her grip on Howl's hand and turned to look behind them. A mistake, as behind had become a rather flexible concept. But Calcifer was right. Dark shapes moved through the between space, riding currents of nothingness with disturbing ease. The hunters found a way to follow us, Nicholas said weakly. He was more transparent than ever, barely a sketch of a person. Of course they did, Howl muttered. Martha, can you? Already on it. Martha had somehow produced a rolling pin from her apron and was whacking at something trying to ooze through the walls. These things are worse than weevils. Princess Valeria, meanwhile, had anchored herself to a bookshelf and was calmly reading from one of Howl's grimoires. It says here that between-world spaces operate on emotional logic rather than physical laws. Strong feelings can reshape reality. Marvelous, Prince Justin said, looking faintly green. I'm feeling quite strongly nauseated. Is that helpful? Think about Christmas, Sophie commanded. Everyone, focus on Christmas memories. What memories? Michael asked desperately. It's all foggy. Then make some up. Sophie closed her eyes and thought fiercely about Christmas as it should be. Warm fires, spiced cider, terrible carolers who got the words wrong, Howl complaining about pine needles in his bathroom, Calcifer wearing a tiny paper crown and pretending to hate it. The castle suddenly steadied. Through the windows, the chaotic between space began to show glimpses of snow-covered mountains. "It's working!" the witch exclaimed. "Sophie, you're brilliant. Everyone, think harder." Martha thought about Christmas cookies that decorated themselves. Prince Justin remembered toy soldiers that had marched across his nursery floor. Princess Valeria focused on the palace's great hall filled with laughter and light. Even the witch contributed, though her Christmas memories seemed to involve a suspicious number of turned-into-frogs ex-lovers. But it was Nicholas who made the difference. As the others fed him their imagined and half-remembered Christmases, he began to solidify. His edges sharpened, his colors deepened, and his voice grew stronger as he said, "The crystal caverns, I can feel them. North and north and north again, where the world ends and winter begins." The castle gave one final stomach-dropping lurch and then crashed into solid ground with a teeth-rattling thud. "We've arrived," Calcifer announced unnecessarily, his flames drooping with exhaustion. "Wherever here is." Sophie looked out the window and immediately wished she hadn't. They had landed on a narrow ledge of ice jutting out from a mountain that disappeared both up and down into freezing mist. The cold pressing against the windows was so intense it had physical weight. "The edge of everything," the witch said quietly. "I remember this place. Beyond here, the normal rules stop applying entirely." "They weren't applying much before," Michael pointed out, still looking queasy. Howl was already gathering supplies, his movements quick and efficient. "We'll have to go on foot from here. The castle can't survive in the caverns. They're too cold even for Calcifer." "I resent that," Calcifer said, but his flames were already turning blue at the edges. "Actually, no, you're right. This cold is trying to eat me." "How far to the caverns?" Sophie asked the witch. "Oh, not far. Just across the Bridge of Sighs, through the Valley of Forgotten Names, past the 3 guardian winds, and then a quick jaunt through the maze of always winter." The witch smiled brightly. "Should only take us a few hours if nothing tries to kill us." "When has nothing ever not tried to kill us?" Sophie said. Prince Justin was helping Nicholas stand. The Christmas spirit looked better than before, but still fragile, like spun glass. "I can sense the others," Nicholas said. "Christmas past and Christmas future. They're in the caverns, trapped with the stolen holiday. We have to hurry. They're fading faster than I am." "Right then," Sophie said, pulling on her warmest cloak, which Howl had apparently enchanted while she wasn't looking, as it was now impossibly warm and smelled of cinnamon. "Let's go steal Christmas back from the witch's ex-boyfriend." "He wasn't really a boyfriend," the witch protested as they prepared to leave. "More of a seasonal fling." They left Michael and Calcifer to guard the castle, despite both their protests. "Someone needs to keep our escape route open," Howl said firmly. "If we're not back in 6 hours, take the castle back to Ingary and get help." "From whom?" Michael asked. "Nobody else remembers Christmas exists." Then remind them, Sophie said. You're clever, you'll think of something. The moment they stepped outside, Sophie understood why the Winter King had chosen this place. The cold wasn't just temperature, it was absence. Absence of warmth, of comfort, of hope. It tried to crawl inside her chest and freeze her heart. Stay close together, Howl commanded, his breath forming ice crystals that hung in the air like tiny stars. And whatever you do, don't listen to the wind. Why? Martha asked. What does the wind... Oh, the wind was singing a horrible, beautiful song about giving up, lying down, letting the ice take you peacefully. Sophie saw Prince Justin's eyes glaze over and slapped him sharply. None of that. We're saving Christmas, not becoming ice sculptures. The Bridge of Sighs was exactly as depressing as its name suggested. A narrow arch of black ice, spanning a chasm so deep, its bottom was lost in darkness. With each step, it moaned with the sadness of everyone who had ever crossed it. Cheerful, Martha muttered, clutching her rolling pin like a weapon. Halfway across, the hunters caught up with them. They came howling out of the mist, shapes of frozen wind and malice, with eyes like black stars and claws of crystallized screams. The first one went straight for Nicholas. Howl's shield spell met it midair in an explosion of golden sparks and ice shards. "Run!" he shouted, throwing up barrier after barrier. But there was nowhere to run on the narrow bridge. The witch cackled and began flinging what looked like balls of concentrated summer at the hunters, each one making them shriek and steam. Martha, in a move that surprised everyone, including herself, whacked a hunter so hard with her rolling pin that it shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Iron," she said, looking at her rolling pin with new respect. "From my grandmother, she said it was for more than just pastry. Less admiring, more running." Sophie grabbed Nicholas, who was barely able to stand, and half carried him across the remaining bridge. The Valley of Forgotten Names was worse than the bridge. Here, the snow spoke in voices of people who had been erased from memory, pleading to be remembered. Princess Valeria began crying silently, and even Prince Justin looked shaken. "Don't listen," the witch said sharply. "They're not real, just echoes the Winter King uses to torment visitors." "How do you know?" Justin asked. "Because I put 3 of them there myself, back when we were together." He wanted romantic gestures. I gave him my ex-lovers' names to forget. She shrugged. It seemed poetic at the time. They struggled on through the valley, the hunters harrying them at every turn. Howl's magic was keeping them at bay. But Sophie could see it was costing him. His face was pale, and his hair, horror of horrors, was actually disheveled. The 3 guardian winds were ancient spirits, older than the Winter King himself. They appeared as columns of spinning air, filled with snow and questions. "Who seeks the stolen season?" the first wind demanded. "We do," Sophie said firmly. "What will you sacrifice for it?" asked the second. Before anyone could answer, Nicholas stepped forward. "Myself, if necessary. I'm Christmas present. I exist only in the moment. I'll fade when this is over anyway." "No," Princess Valeria said unexpectedly. "That's not how Christmas works. It's not about sacrifice, it's about giving, about sharing." She pulled out a small object from her pocket, a music box. This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died. It plays a carol I can't quite remember anymore. Take it. Maybe it will help you remember too." The wind spun faster, considering. Then the third spoke. The gift is accepted, but know this, the one who helps the Winter King is closer than you think. They parted, revealing the entrance to the maze of always winter. Closer than we think? Sophie muttered. That's not ominous at all. The maze was made entirely of mirrors, ice so perfectly reflective it showed not just your image, but all the choices you might have made. Sophie saw herself as an old woman, still running the hat shop. She saw herself as a powerful witch. She saw herself alone, Howl having never returned from some adventure. Don't look, Howl said, taking her hand. The mirrors lie. But Sophie noticed he wasn't looking either, and his hand trembled slightly in hers. It was Martha who solved the maze. The walls aren't real, she announced. They're just frozen fear. Watch. She walked straight through what appeared to be solid ice, her determination melting it like spring sunshine. They followed her, and suddenly they were through, standing before the crystal caverns. Behind them, the guardian winds rose in a single thunderous cry, sweeping away the last of the hunters and scattering them into harmless snow. None would trouble Ingary again. The entrance was magnificent and terrible, a mouth of ice teeth opening into darkness, lit by the blue glow of frozen magic. He's in there, the witch said. I can feel his pretentious melancholy from here. Along with Christmas, Nicholas added, and my siblings. And he frowned. Something else. Something that shouldn't be here. Before they could investigate further, a figure emerged from the caverns. Sophie's heart sank. It was Mrs. Penstemon, or what had been Mrs. Penstemon. Howl's old teacher, whom they'd thought dead, stood before them in robes of winter midnight, her eyes chips of ice. Hello, Howl, she said in a voice like frozen honey. I've been waiting for you. Impossible, Howl breathed. You died. The witch. He turned to look at the witch of the waste, who looked equally shocked. I killed her, the witch confirmed. Thoroughly. Mrs. Penstemon smiled coldly. You killed my body, but at the moment of death, the Winter King caught my spirit, held it in the space between heartbeats. He shaped me anew from ice and remembrance, a body of frost, bound to a soul that would not rest. I have been half alive ever since. He needed someone who understood modern Ingary, someone who could steal Christmas from the inside. I needed revenge on the kingdom that let me die for its politics. We each got what we wanted, or thought we did. You made a deal while dying, Sophie said. That's desperate, yes. I had perhaps 3 seconds to choose, pass on properly or accept his offer. 3 seconds of rage made an eternal decision. For a moment, something flickered in her frozen eyes. Regret. But enough reminiscing. The Winter King is waiting, and you're just in time to watch eternal winter claim Ingary forever. The ice cage snapped shut, trapping them all. Well, said the witch conversationally, this is awkward. Should I apologize for murdering her, or would that make things worse? Despite everything, Sophie found herself fighting not to laugh. Here they were, trapped by an undead magic teacher in an ice cage outside the lair of winter itself, and the witch was worried about etiquette. Right, Sophie said, rolling up her sleeves. I've had enough of this. Howl, remember what you said about the castle, about emotional logic. "Sophie, what are you?" But Sophie was already placing her hands on the ice bars, thinking furiously about warmth. Not heat, warmth. The feeling of Howl's hand in hers. Michael's proud smile when he mastered a spell. Calcifer's grumpy affection. Martha's laughter. The way the castle felt like home. The ice began to melt. "Impossible!" Mrs. Penstemon shrieked. "No," Sophie said firmly. "Just improbable. And I've made a career out of improbable." The cage shattered, and they were free, but Mrs. Penstemon was already fleeing into the caverns, calling for the Winter King. "After her," Howl shouted, "before she warns." A roar like all the blizzards that ever were shook the mountain. From the depths of the caverns, something enormous stirred. The Winter King was awake. Chapter 5, in which the Winter King is surprisingly petty. The crystal caverns were exactly as beautiful and terrible as Sophie had expected. Every surface reflected and refracted light into painful rainbows, while the cold went beyond temperature into something that tried to freeze thoughts before you could think them. Icicles hung like fangs from the ceiling, and the floor was so smooth Sophie had to grab Howl's arm to keep from sliding. "Dignified," she muttered as her feet went in 3 different directions. "I think you look graceful," Howl said, though he was using his staff as a walking stick and had nearly fallen twice. Deeper they went, following the sound of Mrs. Penstemon's fleeing footsteps and that terrible roaring. The caverns opened into larger and larger chambers, each filled with frozen treasures, flowers of ice that would never melt, captured snowflakes the size of dinner plates, and in one disturbing corner, what appeared to be frozen laughter in bell jars. "He's gotten worse," the witch observed. "When I knew him, he only collected frozen tears." They rounded a corner and stopped dead. Before them stretched a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center, on a throne made of compressed winter storms, sat the Winter King. He was both more and less than Sophie had expected. Tall, yes, but thin to the point of looking starved. His skin was the blue-white of deep ice, and his hair seemed to be made of actual winter wind, constantly moving. The crown of frozen stars on his head gave off a light that hurt to look at. But it was his expression that struck Sophie most, utterly, completely bored. "Finally," he said, in a voice like ice cracking on a deep lake. "Do you know how tedious it's been, waiting for you to arrive? Penstemon promised me you'd be here hours ago." Mrs. Penstemon stood beside his throne, looking smug despite her ice-covered robes. "They were delayed, my lord." "By your hunters," Sophie pointed out, "which you sent." The Winter King waved a languid hand. "One must maintain certain standards. Heroes arrive, one sends hunters, there's a chase scene. It's all very traditional, though I must say, using a rolling pin as a weapon, rather lowering the tone." Martha bristled. "It worked, didn't it?" "Barely." The Winter King stood, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. "Now then, you've come for Christmas, I suppose?" "It's over there." He gestured carelessly to the far wall, where Sophie could see it. Christmas, trapped in the largest snow globe she'd ever seen. Inside, she could make out tiny figures of the 2 other Christmas spirits, barely visible sparks of light, along with swirling images of trees, presents, carols, and joy, all miniaturized and imprisoned. Just like that, Prince Justin said suspiciously. You're showing us where it is? Why not? You can see it. You simply can't have it. The Winter King returned to his throne with a dramatic sigh. Do you want to know why I took it? The real reason? Because Ingary broke its bargain, Princess Valeria suggested. Because you want eternal winter? Howl added. The Winter King laughed, a sound like chandeliers made of ice falling. No, no, no. I stole Christmas because for 300 years I've had to listen to those insipid carols. The Winter King's tone wavered between rage and heartbreak. Jingle bells, deck the halls, mocking winter with hollow laughter while I watched from the edges. Do you know what fa la 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 sounds like to one who hears every note of scorn and cheer twisted together? It's torment. Centuries of mortals turning my season into noise and glitter, forgetting why it existed at all. Everyone stared at him. You stole an entire holiday, Sophie said slowly, because you don't like the music. Don't oversimplify. It's also the forced cheer, the terrible sweaters, the fruitcake. Who actually likes fruitcake? And worst of all, the way everyone pretends to be nice for exactly 1 month and then goes back to being horrible. He slumped in his throne. At least winter is honest. It's cold, it's harsh, and it doesn't pretend otherwise. That's the pettiest thing I've ever heard, the witch said admiringly, and I once cursed a man for wearing the wrong shade of purple. Nicholas, who had been growing more solid the closer they got to the trapped Christmas, stepped forward. You don't understand. Christmas isn't about perfection. It's about trying, about believing things can be better, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Believing. The Winter King stood again, and this time his anger was genuine. I believed once. I believed the mortals of Ingary would honor our bargain. Instead, they commercialized it, packaged it, and sold it. Your Christmas became about things, not thoughts. Purchases, not people. He has a point, Martha said quietly, then louder when everyone looked at her. Well, he does. Have you seen the shopping crowds? They're vicious. Exactly. The Winter King pointed at her triumphantly. This one understands. But that's not Christmas's fault, Sophie interrupted. People are people. They'll find a way to complicate anything. That doesn't mean you throw away the whole holiday. Doesn't it? Mrs. Penstemon interjected. The kingdom that celebrates peace and goodwill is the same one that let me die for politics. The hypocrisy is staggering. Princess Valeria suddenly stepped forward, and Sophie noticed the golden threads around her head were glowing brighter. You're wrong. The kingdom didn't let you die. You chose to fight. But more importantly, you're forgetting why I can remember Christmas when others can't. The remembering spell, the Winter King said dismissively. A simple enchantment. Not simple at all, Valeria interrupted with surprising authority. The spell only works on those who truly believe in what Christmas represents. Not the presents or parties, but the hope that people can be better. That's why it chose me, because even knowing all of Ingary's flaws, I still believe we can improve. Prince Justin moved to stand beside her. In Strangia, we have a tradition. On the darkest night of winter, every person lights a candle for someone else, never for themselves. The light isn't much alone, but together. He pulled out a simple white candle from his pack. I brought this for Ingary. Even when you couldn't remember Christmas, I remembered for you. The Winter King's perfect composure cracked. Sentimental nonsense. Is it? Mrs. Penstemmon's voice wavered. Howl, did you really mourn me? I did mourn you. Howl's voice cracked. I changed my entire life because of your death. I thought I'd failed you. Well, Mrs. Penstemon said, looking shaken, you could have sent flowers to my grave. You were dissolved. There was nothing to bury. Details, she sniffed, but her ice-cold certainty was melting. The Winter King groaned. Are we really doing emotional reconciliation now? How dreadfully warm. He raised his hand, and ice began forming around Sophie's feet. Let's skip to the part where I freeze you all and keep eternal winter. But something unexpected happened. The ice touched Sophie's shoes and immediately melted. She looked down, surprised, then realized she was still thinking about warmth, had been since she broke the cage. The feeling had settled into her bones, like a constant heartbeat of home family love. You can't freeze me, she said, stepping forward. The ice retreated from her footsteps. You can't freeze any of us, because we're full of exactly what you hate. All those sticky, messy, warm emotions. Then I'll simply take them. The Winter King gestured sharply, and Sophie felt a pull, as if something was trying to yank her feelings out through her chest. But Howl was there, his arms around her, and the pull lessened. Martha grabbed them both, and Prince Justin grabbed Martha, and Princess Valeria took his hand, and even the witch joined the chain, cackling about how this was better than that trust fall exercise at the coven retreat. Nicholas blazed brighter. You see, this is Christmas, not the songs or the presents or the perfect dinners. This, people holding on to each other when everything tries to pull them apart. The Winter King's face contorted with rage, and something else. Was it longing? Enough! Penstemon, freeze them properly. But Mrs. Penstemon was staring at Howl with an odd expression. You really did mourn me? Of course I did. You taught me everything. Well, everything except how to do my hair, but that's natural talent. Despite the situation, Mrs. Penstemon's lips twitched. You always were impossibly vain. I suppose dying rather upset my judgment. Rather, the witch said. Dear, you aligned yourself with the anthropomorphic personification of seasonal depression. That's more than rather upset. The Winter King stood from his throne, his full power unfurling. The cavern shook, and ice began growing from every surface in sharp, deadly formations. If warm emotions protect you, then I'll simply have to remove them differently, permanently. He began to sing. It wasn't like the wind's song on the bridge. This was older, deeper, a song that existed before language, when winter was the death that came for everyone in the dark months. It spoke of the peace of giving up, the rest of stopping, the quiet of ending. Sophie felt her determination wavering. Around her, the others were swaying. Even Nicholas's light was dimming. But then, unexpected and impossibly off-key, another voice joined in. Calcifer. The fire demon had somehow left the castle and entered the cavern, carried in a peculiar glass bowl by Michael, who was red-faced from running. The bowl glowed with the same spell light the witch had been teaching him, a temporary freedom for the fire demon. We did it, Michael gasped. The portable hearth spell worked, though it'll only last an hour. Perfect timing, Calcifer interrupted, still singing, badly, enthusiastically, and completely wrong, the tune of what might have been Good King Wenceslas, if it had been arranged by someone tone-deaf and performed by a crackling fire. Calcifer, Sophie gasped. How? Michael remembered something important, Calcifer said cheerfully between verses. Michael held up a battered journal. Mrs. Penstemmon's teaching notes. She left them in the castle years ago. Look. He opened it to a page covered in neat handwriting. The greatest magic is not in the spell, but in the choosing to cast it. Evil is not in the power, but in the decision to use it cruelly. Mrs. Penstemon stared at her own words. I wrote that. The day before you died, Howl said softly, you were trying to teach me about responsibility. As Christmas's prison began to crack, the two other spirits flickered into being beside Nicholas, taking on shape from the freed magic, one childlike and bright, the other tall and solemn. Christmas Past suddenly giggled, a sound like sleigh bells made of starlight. Oh, I remember you writing that. It was a Tuesday. You'd had too much tea and were feeling philosophical. You also wrote a shopping list on the next page. Eggs, bread, and something to remove scorch marks from carpets. Mrs. Penstemon blinked. Yes, I remember. The scorch marks were from a failed teaching demonstration. Christmas Future spoke in a voice like distant thunder. What was shall be again, what is shall pass, what will be depends on choices made in this moment between moments. Must you always speak in riddles? The witch asked irritably. It is my nature, Future replied solemnly, then added with surprising humor. Also, it's tremendously fun watching people try to figure out what I mean. The Winter King's song faltered. His perfect, deadly music was being absolutely murdered by Calcifer's enthusiastic caterwauling, which had now moved on to something that might have been Silent Night, if Silent Nights involved quite so much crackling and off-key humming. Stop that, the Winter King commanded. Can't, Calcifer said cheerfully. I'm full of Christmas spirit. Literally, Michael fed me figgy pudding. You fed fire figgy pudding? Sophie asked. It seemed like a good idea at the time. The Winter King raised both hands, preparing what was clearly going to be a massive, cavern-destroying blast of ultimate winter. Enough! I will end all warmth, all joy, all because someone hurt your feelings, Sophie interrupted. The Winter King paused. What? That's what this is really about, isn't it? Ingary disappointed you. Christmas didn't turn out how you wanted, so you're having the magical equivalent of a tantrum. I am the Winter King. I do not have tantrums. You're literally shouting that you don't have tantrums, Martha pointed out. That's quite tantrum-like. The Winter King's eye twitched. Prince Justin lit his Strangian candle with a word. The tiny flame shouldn't have mattered in the vast frozen cavern, but something extraordinary happened. The moment the wick caught, the flame burned not orange but silver-white, like starlight given form. This is the eternal candle of Strangia, Justin said quietly. I wasn't just bringing any candle. I brought our most sacred tradition. It's been burning, passed from flame to flame, for over 1,000 years. Princess Valeria reached toward the flame, and the golden threads around her head responded like living things, stretching toward the light. When thread met flame, the cavern filled with a sound like distant bells. "Oh," Valeria gasped, her eyes widening. "I can feel them. Everyone. Every person in Ingary who ever celebrated Christmas, who ever tried to make someone else smile in winter. They're all here, in the threads." The golden light began spreading, but slowly, like honey poured on a cold morning. Each thread that touched someone brought with it a memory, not their own, but someone else's Christmas. Sophie suddenly remembered a Christmas through the eyes of a child from 100 years ago, seeing snow for the first time. Howl experienced an old woman's last Christmas, surrounded by grandchildren she'd never thought she'd live to meet. "Stop that!" The Winter King raised his hands, ice forming around his fingers. "I won't let you." "Let us?" The witch laughed, but it was sad rather than mocking. "My dear, we're not doing anything to you. We're just remembering." The Winter King launched a spear of ice at the spreading threads, but when it touched them, something unexpected happened. The ice didn't destroy the light. It conducted it, turning into a prism that split the golden glow into every color of winter sunset. "Impossible," he breathed. "No," Mrs. Penstemon said slowly, staring at the threads as they reached her. Her voice broke. Oh, I remember now. My first Christmas at the palace. The king's father was alive then, and he thanked me for my service. Said I gave him hope that magic and mundane could coexist. I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten the good parts." Sophie walked toward the snow globe, each step deliberate. The globe sat on a pedestal of ice so pure it looked like captured starlight. Inside, she could see Christmas, not as a thing, but as a living idea, swirling with colors that had no names, sounds that were more feeling than noise. "You're right about some things," Sophie said to the Winter King, not breaking her stride. "Christmas has been commercialized. The music can be terrible. People are hypocrites. But you know what you're wrong about." She reached the globe and placed her hands on it. The cold was beyond description, not just freezing, but the complete absence of warmth, trying to pull all heat from her body, her memories, her very soul. "You're wrong that those flaws make it worthless." Prince Justin joined her, pressing his candle against the globe. Where flame met ice, steam rose, but the ice didn't melt. It began to sing, a high, clear note like crystal glasses struck by silver spoons. "In Strangia," Justin said through gritted teeth, the cold clearly affecting him too. "We have a saying. Winter without end is not winter at all. It's death. Winter's beauty is in its promise of spring." "Pretty words," the Winter King snarled, but his voice shook. The golden threads had reached him now, and his eyes were wide with something that might have been fear or might have been longing. "But I am eternal winter. I don't end." "Don't you?" Princess Valeria walked toward him, threads flowing from her like a golden cloak. "Then why do you remember spring?" The Winter King froze, truly froze, not in ice, but in shock. Valeria continued, her voice gentle but certain. "The threads show everything. You remember spring. You remember the first flower you saw after your first winter as king. You kept it, pressed in ice, because it reminded you that your cold had meaning. It made warmth precious." "Stop," the Winter King whispered. "You didn't steal Christmas because you hate warmth," Valeria said. "You stole it because you miss it, because watching mortals celebrate while you could only bring cold finally broke something in you." Sophie felt the globe crack under her hands. not shattering but fracturing like ice in spring. Slowly, inevitably, light began seeping through the cracks, not golden like the threads, but every color that Christmas had ever been. The silver of snow, the gold of candlelight, the deep green of winter pines, the red of holly berries, and children's cheeks cold from playing. "Please," the Winter King said, and Sophie couldn't tell if he was begging them to stop or continue. Martha stepped forward then, still clutching her rolling pin like a talisman. "When I was little," she said quietly, "I used to leave cookies out for winter itself. Not for Father Christmas, but for winter. Because Mum said winter must be lonely, being the season everyone wants to end." The Winter King made a sound that might have been a sob. The Witch of the Waste stepped forward then, her usual sardonic smile replaced by something softer. "I remember why I left you," she said quietly to the Winter King. "Not because you were cold, but because you couldn't believe you deserved warmth. You pushed me away every time I tried to show you spring could exist, even in winter. You left me for summer," the Winter King said bitterly. "No, dear. I left because watching you refuse happiness was breaking my heart. Even now, you're doing it, pushing away every hand extended to you. Nicholas, the spirit of Christmas present, moved between the Winter King and the globe. You don't have to be alone. You never did. Christmas was supposed to be the bridge, winter and warmth together, the cold that makes us appreciate heat, the darkness that makes us create light. We failed you as much as you failed us." Christmas Past spoke up, bouncing on their toes like an eager child. "Do you remember the first Christmas? Not the stealing, the very first one? You watched from the edges and almost smiled when the children laughed. I remember, because remembering is what I do. You wanted to join them, but didn't know how." "Stop," the Winter King pleaded. "Time moves in all directions in this place," Christmas Future intoned. "I see 10,000 possible winters. In half of them, you choose joy. In half, you choose sorrow. The path splits here, in this moment, on this breath between heartbeats." The globe's cracks widened. Past and future joined Nicholas at its edge. Past, a child made of memories, and future, ancient and patient. Together they pressed their hands to the glass, adding their power to those outside. "Together," Sophie said, looking at the Winter King. "It has to be together. You have to choose to let it go." I can't. It's been so long. I don't remember how to not be cold." "Then let us remember for you," Howl said, surprising everyone. He walked to the Winter King and, in a gesture that clearly cost him, given his feelings about potentially mussing his outfit, embraced the ancient being of ice and sorrow. The Winter King shattered, not into pieces, but into possibility. For a moment, he was everything winter had ever been, the cruel blizzard and the gentle snow, the killing frost and the crystalline beauty of ice, the long darkness and the peace of rest. And in that moment of infinite potential, he reached out and touched the globe. It didn't shatter. It dissolved, like snow in spring rain, like frost touched by breath, like winter giving way to hope. The release of Christmas was not an explosion, but an exhale, 300 years of held breath finally released. "No!" The Winter King lunged forward, but Mrs. Pentstemon stepped into his path. "My lord," she said quietly, perhaps it's time to let winter be just winter again." The globe shattered completely, and throughout Ingary, in that instant, everyone remembered. Chapter 6, in which Christmas is rather more chaotic than expected. The release of Christmas was not violent, but overwhelming, like opening a door you'd been pressing against, only to find no one pushing from the other side. Sophie staggered as 300 years of concentrated holiday spirit flooded the cavern in waves. First came the lights, not electric, but the memory of every candle, every star, every fire that had ever burned on a December night. They swirled through the air like lost constellations finding their way home. Then came the sounds, not the cacophony Sophie had expected, but layers of memory, children laughing, church bells ringing, snow falling on quiet streets, and yes, carols, but sung by real voices, imperfect and human and trying. The Winter King stood in the center of it all, tears of actual water, not ice, streaming down his face. "I remember," he whispered. "I remember why I loved winter. Not for the cold, but for what the cold meant. The gathering together, the shared warmth, the proof that life persists even in darkness." The 3 Christmas spirits materialized fully as the globe's prison dissolved completely. Christmas passed, a child made of candlelight and memory ran to the Winter King and hugged his knees. "We missed you," the child spirit said. "Winter was never supposed to be our enemy." Christmas future, ancient and patient, placed a weathered hand on the Winter King's shoulder. "The future needs all seasons in balance. You've learned that now." And Nicholas, Christmas present, laughed with pure relief. "We're whole again, all of us." But the cavern had absorbed too much magic. Cracks spread across the ceiling like lightning, and chunks of ice began falling, not violently, but with the inevitable patience of a structure that knows its time has come. "We need to leave," Howl said, but his voice lacked urgency. The danger was real, but not malicious. This was just an ending, natural as winter giving way to spring. The Winter King looked up at his collapsing domain. "My 1,000-year palace, my collections, my perfect order." "Let it go," Mrs. Penstemon said softly. She looked transformed. The ice in her eyes had melted, leaving them brown and human and sad. "I had to let go of my anger. You have to let go of your isolation." The Winter King nodded slowly. With a gesture, he created a bridge of ice, not the black ice of before, but something that caught and reflected the Christmas lights, turning rainbow bright. "This way. Let the old winter bury itself. We'll build something new." As they crossed the bridge, Sophie looked back to see the cavern transforming. Where ice fell, flowers bloomed, impossible winter roses that sparkled with frost, but lived despite the cold. The throne of frozen storms became a fountain of snow that fell upward, defying logic, but obeying the newer, warmer magic. They emerged from the caverns to find the world changed. The eternal winter storms had become gentle snow, falling in fat, lazy flakes. The sun, weak but present, painted the mountains in shades of pearl and gold. During the journey back, while the others walked ahead, Howl took Sophie's hand and pulled her aside for a moment. They stood together, watching the sun set over the transformed landscape. "You melted eternal winter with stubbornness," he said softly. "I shouldn't be surprised anymore. but you keep amazing me." Sophie leaned into him. "You hugged the Winter King. You who won't even shake hands if it might wrinkle your sleeves." "Yes, well, my suit was already ruined. Might as well commit to heroism." He was quiet for a moment. "Sophie, when I saw all those possible futures in the mirror maze, most of them were wonderful, as long as you were there." "Just most?" "In one, you convinced me to get a practical haircut." Sophie laughed, and it echoed across the mountains like bells. "Never." "That's my sensible Sophie," he said, and kissed her forehead. "Sensible about everything except me." "Someone has to keep you impossible," she replied. "It's beautiful," Princess Valeria called back to them, her golden threads still glowing but softer now, like sunset rather than noon. Prince Justin's candle had somehow survived everything, still burning with its ancient flame. In Strangia, we'll tell this story. How Ingary saved Christmas by remembering that flaws don't diminish worth. The Winter King stood apart from the group, looking lost. Without his crown, his robes of office, his terrible purpose, he seemed smaller, almost human. "What am I now?" he asked. "If not eternal winter, then what?" Sophie approached him carefully. "You're what you always should have been. Winter itself, necessary, beautiful in its time, and part of the greater cycle. Not eternal, but eternally returning." "That's terrifying," he admitted. "To end, to begin again, to change." "That's living," Martha said practically, "and you get used to it." "Mostly." Calcifer's voice suddenly echoed across the mountains. "Are you all done with your dramatic revelations? Because Michael is trying to teach me harmonies, and I'm about to set something on fire. Probably Michael." Despite everything, Sophie laughed. "We should get back." The journey back to the castle was slow, contemplative. The Winter King walked with them, uncertain but trying. Occasionally, he would forget and make the temperature drop, then catch himself and apologize. Once, when Martha slipped on ice, he caught her with a wind that was cold but gentle. "Thank you," she said, surprised. "I'm practicing," he replied with dignity that was only slightly undermined by the Christmas ornament still tangled in his hair from the cavern explosion. The castle, when they reached it, was exactly as chaotic as expected. Michael had indeed been trying to teach Calcifer to sing in harmony. The fire demon had retaliated by decorating Michael with soot in festive patterns. Tea towels were everywhere. "You're back," Michael exclaimed. "Is Christmas saved? Is that the Winter King? Why does Prince Justin's candle smell like peppermint? Can someone please make Calcifer stop trying to sing Good King Wenceslas?" "Christmas is saved," Sophie confirmed. "This is the Winter King who'll be joining us for Christmas Eve. The candle is magical, and no one can stop Calcifer when he's determined." "I'm spreading holiday cheer," Calcifer announced, then began what might have been Silent Night, if silence could scream. The Winter King looked at the chaos, at Howl trying to salvage his singed cloak, at the witch critiquing Calcifer's performance, at Mrs. Penstemon hesitantly accepting a cup of tea from Michael, at Prince Justin and Princess Valeria, already planning how to help Ingary adjust to the return of Christmas. "This is terrible," he said. Everyone froze. "Terribly warm," he continued, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "Terribly chaotic, terribly human. I think I need to learn to appreciate terrible things." "That's the spirit," The witch cackled. Now, let me tell you about the time I turned my ex into a frog for giving me socks for Christmas. The magic's too much for the structure. Howl was already casting protective shields as chunks of ice began falling. Everyone out. But the Winter King wasn't moving. He stood in the middle of the chaos, looking utterly defeated as centuries of Christmas overwhelmed his perfect cold domain. "Just leave me," he said dramatically. "Let me be buried under fruitcake and good intentions." The Witch of the Waste rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake." She marched over and slapped him. "You're immortal, you ninny. You can't die from falling ice. You'll just be trapped under rubble feeling sorry for yourself." "That sounds peaceful, actually." Mrs. Penstemon, who had been quiet since the globe shattered, stepped forward. "My lord, perhaps it's time to stop fighting what cannot be fought." The Winter King looked at her, then at the chaos around them. A knitted scarf from 1892 had wrapped itself affectionately around his ankle. "But I'm winter. I'm supposed to be cold and distant and seasonal," Sophie interrupted. "You're supposed to be seasonal. Winter has its place, but so does warmth. You've been trying to be eternal when you're meant to be cyclical." Christmas Future spoke for the first time, his voice like distant bells. "She speaks truth. Winter's beauty is in its ending, making way for spring. You've forgotten your purpose in your pain." The cavern gave another tremendous shake. A massive crack split the floor between them and the exit. "Philosophy later, escape now," Martha shouted, whacking away a particularly aggressive nutcracker with her rolling pin. Howl gathered his power, preparing to transport them, but the magical chaos was interfering. Sparks of Christmas magic kept turning his spells into things like flying turkeys and spontaneous snowball fights. "I can't get us out," he said, looking genuinely worried. "There's too much interference." That's when Calcifer, who had been suspiciously quiet, spoke up. "I have an idea. But it's stupid." "Your last stupid idea involved eating figgy pudding, and it saved the day," Michael pointed out. "Fair. Okay, everyone grab onto someone. Winter King, that means you too. I don't. Grab on or be buried under musical puddings." The Winter King hastily grabbed Mrs. Penstemon's hand. She looked startled, but didn't pull away. Calcifer blazed higher, his flames turning every color of Christmas. Red, green, gold, silver, and several colors that didn't have names but definitely involved tinsel. "Right, I'm going to burn a path through the chaos. But I need fuel. Everyone think of your worst Christmas memory. The absolutely worst one." "What?" Prince Justin looked confused. "Trust me. Worst memories now." Sophie thought of the Christmas when she'd been alone in the hat shop, convinced she'd be there forever. Howl remembered the year he'd been too afraid to go home, scared of what his family would think of what he'd become. Martha recalled burning an entire batch of Christmas cookies and crying in the pantry. The witch thought of centuries of Christmases spent plotting revenge instead of living. Even the Winter King contributed, a memory of the first Christmas after his banishment, watching mortals celebrate while he could only observe from the spaces between. Calcifer absorbed them all and blazed like a star. "The thing about bad memories," he said, his voice crackling with power, "is they make the good ones matter more." He exploded outward in a sphere of flame that was somehow warm but not burning, pushing back the chaos, just enough to create a path. They ran, sliding and stumbling through the mixture of ice and Christmas mayhem. Behind them, the cavern collapsed entirely, burying the Winter King's throne room under tons of ice and several centuries' worth of decorations. They burst out of the caverns into daylight, actual daylight, weak winter sun that had been hidden behind the Winter King's eternal storms. The three Christmas spirits hovered nearby, finally free. "We should return to our duties," Christmas Future said. 300 years of backed-up Christmases to properly distribute. It's going to be the most chaotic holiday season ever. Christmas Past added gleefully. Nicholas, Christmas Present, turned to Sophie. "Thank you. You saved more than just a holiday. You saved the idea that imperfect things can still be worth celebrating." The three spirits dissolved into sparks of light that scattered on the wind, carrying Christmas back to where it belonged, which left them with the problem of the Winter King and Mrs. Penstemon. The Winter King stood in the snow, looking smaller without his crown, which was still somewhere under the rubble being serenaded by puddings. "So, what now? Lock me up? Banish me again?" "Don't be ridiculous," Sophie said. "You're winter. We need you. Just proportionally. Besides," the witch added, "you're not actually evil. You're just a massive drama queen with valid complaints about commercialization." "I prefer theatrical with legitimate grievances," the Winter King said, with a hint of his old haughtiness. Mrs. Penstemon cleared her throat. I owe apologies. To everyone, but especially to you, Howl. I let my anger corrupt my judgment. I taught you about responsibility while abandoning my own." Howl looked at his former teacher for a long moment. "You died. That tends to affect one's judgment. But you're here now, and that's what matters. Though you're going to have to explain to the king how you're alive." "Ah, yes. That will be awkward. I have a suggestion," Princess Valeria said. Everyone turned to look at her. They'd almost forgotten she was there. She'd been so quiet during the escape. The palace needs a new court sorcerer. Someone to help manage the magical chaos that's about to hit Ingary. Mrs. Penstemon, you'd be perfect. After I committed treason? You were technically dead at the time. I think we can call it a legal gray area. The Winter King coughed. "And what about me?" Martha, of all people, answered. "You could help. The magical chaos, I mean. If Christmas is going to be completely mad this year, we'll need someone who understands both winter and magic to help sort it out. You want me to manage Christmas?" The Winter King looked appalled and intrigued in equal measure. "Think of it as quality control," Sophie suggested, "making sure it doesn't get too commercial or too loud. Within reason. I suppose I could establish some standards. No more than 3 repetitions of Jingle Bells per day, for instance." "Let's not get carried away," Howl said. The journey back to the castle was surprisingly peaceful. The Winter King's storms had dissipated, leaving clear, cold air that made the mountains shine. Prince Justin's candle, somehow still burning despite everything, led the way like a tiny star. Princess Valeria walked beside the Winter King, the golden threads around her slowly extending to encompass him too. "It's strange," the Winter King said quietly. "I can feel them. All of Ingary's Christmas memories flowing through your spell. They're so messy." "That's what makes them real," Valeria replied, Perfect memories wouldn't mean anything. The castle was where they'd left it, though slightly buried in snow and decorated with what appeared to be tea towels that Calcifer had hung as makeshift bunting. I was bored, the fire demon explained. The journey back through the between spaces was much easier with the Winter King helping. He actually knew how to navigate them, which meant fewer floating teacups and no nauseating inversions of reality. They arrived in Market Chipping just as the sun was setting on December 23rd. The entire town had exploded into Christmas preparation, 300 years of it happening all at once. There were at least 17 Christmas trees in the square, carolers from different centuries singing different songs, and someone had built a snow fort that was somehow also made of gingerbread. "It's chaos," the king said when they reported to the palace. "Complete, wonderful chaos. Half the kingdom is having Christmas in July. The other half is trying to have all 12 days simultaneously. And there's a Tudor-era feast happening in the wine cellar that no one remembers organizing." "It'll settle down," Sophie assured him. "Eventually. Probably. Maybe by February." Princess Valeria stepped forward. "Father, I can help. The golden threads, they're still active. I can use them to help people sort their real memories from the 3 centuries of backed up ones. And I'll coordinate with Strangia," Prince Justin added. "We can share our traditions to help ground Ingary's Christmas while it finds its feet again. The candle ceremony especially. It's simple, meaningful, and doesn't involve any sentient puddings." The king looked relieved. "Excellent. Valeria, I'm putting you in charge of the Royal Commission for Christmas Restoration. Prince Justin, would you serve as our diplomatic liaison for holiday traditions?" Both young people accepted eagerly. The Winter King and Mrs. Penstemon were formally pardoned after a very complicated legal discussion about whether dead people could commit treason. The Winter King was given the title of Lord of Winter Festivals, responsible for ensuring winter celebrations stayed balanced, neither too commercial nor too chaotic. Mrs. Penstemon became the new royal sorceress, with the specific task of teaching young wizards about the responsibility that came with power. Christmas Eve arrived in a flurry of activity. The castle was packed. Sophie's sisters, though Letty sent apologies and a magical fruit basket that sang when opened, Prince Justin, who had brought candles for everyone, Princess Valeria, who was teaching Michael how to weave memory threads, the witch, who had appointed herself in charge of decorations, and the 3 Christmas spirits, who had decided to stay for the celebration. Christmas past had taken a particular liking to Michael, the 2 of them being close in apparent age. "I remember when you first came to the castle," Past said cheerfully. "You were so nervous, you accidentally turned your hair blue." "That was supposed to be a secret," Michael protested, but he was grinning. "Nothing's secret from the past," the spirit replied, then taught him how to make ornaments from crystallized memories, each one showing a happy moment from previous Christmases. "This is nice," Martha said, flour in her hair from baking. "Chaotic, but nice." "It's perfect," Sophie corrected, watching the organized chaos. Prince Justin was teaching everyone the Strangian tradition of lighting candles for others, with each person explaining who their light was for. Princess Valeria's golden threads connected everyone in the room, sharing the warmth of their Christmas memories, both old and newly made. "For Sophie," Howl said, lighting his candle, "who reminds us that imperfect things are worth saving. For the Winter King, Valeria said, surprising everyone, who needed to remember that winter and warmth can coexist. For Ingary, Justin added, which is learning that traditions can be borrowed, shared, and made new. Michael and the princess were enchanting ornaments to dance while sharing stories of their strangest recovered Christmas memories. The witch and Mrs. Pentstemon were having a surprisingly civil conversation about the proper way to curse fruitcake. The Winter King, who insisted on being called Nicholas when he wasn't being formally winter, was teaching Martha how to make icicles that wouldn't melt, but would taste like peppermint. You know, Howl said, appearing at Sophie's elbow with 2 cups of mulled cider. This isn't how I expected to spend Christmas. Fighting seasonal personifications of depression and saving the concept of joy itself. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds almost normal for us. He handed her a cup and smiled, his real smile, not the practiced one. Thank you. For what? For remembering that imperfect things are worth saving. For melting ice with stubbornness. For being Sophie. Before she could respond, Calcifer started another horrible rendition of Good King Wenceslas. The witch's decorations came alive and began a conga line, and somewhere in Market Chipping, church bells began to ring, not perfectly synchronized, not in the right key, but with such enthusiasm that it didn't matter. Presents, Michael shouted. It's midnight. It's Christmas. And it was. Messy, chaotic, imperfect, with too many people crammed into too small a space, terrible singing, and at least one enchanted pudding trying to escape out the window. Wait, the Winter King said suddenly, looking uncomfortable. Before we continue, I have a confession. Everyone turned to look at him. Those terrible Christmas songs I complained about. Jingle Bells, The Little Drummer Boy, that awful one about the hippopotamus. He cleared his throat. I wrote them. What? Everyone said in unison. 300 years ago, I thought, if I made Christmas music annoying enough, people would stop celebrating. Instead, they became traditions. He looked mortified. Every year I had to listen to my own revenge songs becoming beloved classics. Do you have any idea how maddening it is to hear children singing your instruments of torture with genuine joy? The witch burst out laughing so hard she had to sit down. You wrote, Grandma got run over by a reindeer? That one was particularly petty, yes. This is the best Christmas present ever. Calcifer crackled, the Winter King defeated by his own bad taste in music. Despite himself, the Winter King smiled. I suppose there's some poetic justice in it. Next year, Sophie said firmly, you're writing good carols. I wouldn't know how, he admitted. Then you'll learn, Martha said. We all had to learn how to celebrate properly. Even Howl had to learn that green hair isn't appropriate for Christmas dinner. That was one time, Howl protested. It was absolutely perfect. Outside, snow began to fall. Proper snow, not the Winter King's eternal blizzard, but gentle Christmas snow that made everything look soft and magical and new. In the distance, Sophie could hear all of Market Chipping celebrating at once. 3 centuries of Christmas joy, finally free to express itself. Next year, the Winter King announced, we're establishing some ground rules. 1 Christmas tree per household, maximum. You'll be back next year? Sophie asked. He looked embarrassed. Well, someone has to make sure you don't make a mess of it again. The witch cackled. He means he had fun. I most certainly did not. But his protest was drowned out by Calcifer starting the 12 days of Christmas with enthusiastic inaccuracy, everyone joining in with different verses, and the castle itself seeming to hum along, warm and bright against the winter night. Sophie looked around at her strange, wonderful, impossible family, both born and chosen, and thought that perhaps the Winter King had been wrong. Christmas wasn't about perfection or commerce or even tradition. It was about this, people choosing to be together when the world was cold and dark, making their own light and warmth, and singing badly enough to make ancient elemental forces wince, which, when she thought about it, was really the most human magic of all. The end. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, when the Christmas chaos had finally died down to merely excessive rather than reality-breaking, Sophie found a note that had been slipped under the castle door. Dear Mrs. Sophie, the Magical Auditing Department would like to inform you that this year's Christmas resulted in 247 sentient puddings, now relocated to a nice farm, 1,892 cases of spontaneous caroling, 47 time paradoxes, resolved by Princess Valeria's memory threads, 1 new international holiday tradition, Prince Justin's candle ceremony, 1 friendship between former enemies, infinite memories that will last forever. We consider this a successful holiday season. P.S. The Winter King has requested that next year we limit jingle bells to twice daily. Princess Valeria and Prince Justin have volunteered to mediate negotiations. We told them you'd all discuss it at next year's planning committee. Merry Christmas, the Christmas spirits, past, present, and future. Sophie smiled and tucked the note away. A planning committee with the Winter King, a princess who could weave memories, and a prince who brought traditions from other lands. Next Christmas was going to be interesting, but then again, when had their Christmases ever been anything else? And this is where we finish our tale. Thank you for letting me be a part of your journey to the land of sleep. If you've enjoyed our time together, countless other journeys await in previous episodes, ready to accompany you into the realm of dreams. So, as we close the book on our story this evening, I wish you a night filled with serene dreams and restful sleep. Good night, until we meet again in another tale. Rest well.